Canada's a country that's experiencing significant aging. It's a reality. Other countries are going through it as well.
Yeah.
So the number of people that are 65 and over relative to the working age population, that ratio is changing dramatically over the next 2 decades. So, economists like actuaries, we do this fiscal sustainability analysis. So we'll look at the federal balance sheet. We'll say, let's assume the current, tax structure doesn't change, the current spending structure doesn't change, same current old age security program, same transfers on health, et cetera. And then we project forward with the aging demographics, like, is Canada, federal government sustainable? And we look at the numbers, we say, yes, we're roughly sustainable. So even with government committing potentially some new monies for national defense, et cetera, we're roughly sustainable. But we look at the provinces, are they sustainable? And then we say, no, they're not sustainable. So, and again, one of the turning points really came under the previous government when they changed the escalator for the Canada Health Transfer, which was growing at a very high rate, faster than the growth of the economy. Minister Flaherty brought it down to kind of an average, of nominal GDP. Not saying that was Brad, that was the context of how they thought the Federation should run. It was a different political view. But that fundamentally put a lot of burden, fiscal weight on the provinces to deal with, this rising healthcare costs. So we're not, but actually when you stand way back in terms of the size of Canada's fiscal sustainability challenges, you look at pensions and other issues, we have a little bit of a hole, not a big hole, but there is a little bit of a hole that we need to be mindful of, and so we need to be careful when we're managing it. So it's important that this type of work, and the PBO does this work, Ministry of Finance, they do the work, but they don't publish it as transparently as the Prompt Budget Office. International Monetary Fund, they do this work all across the world. It's important that you have this long-term view. So getting back to balance is really just, it's making sure that these interest costs relative to budgetary revenues, the carrying cost of debt doesn't explode. And again, I was a public servant through the 80s and 90s. I remember being in the early 90s, and, for every revenue dollar we took in, 38 cents went to interest on the public debt. So we had 11 years of balanced budgets, we brought it down to 10 cents. So again, I remember, my bosses were going to greet the finance minister of the day, and they were saying I had no room to maneuver. And again, when you're paying 38 cents on every revenue dollar, just our interest on your visa bill, you don't have a lot of room to maneuver. And then we watched. I remember I was at the Privy Council office, and we had the Conservatives were in. They were spending roughly just under 10 cents on every revenue dollar. So you have all kinds of flexibility. You say, we're going to cut the GST, we're going to put more money in defense, we're going to be tough on crime, we're going to, so again, right now, the interest cost is still low, but it's low because we have these record low interest rates. Yeah. Once you start normalizing these interest rates and you can see them start to move up, this debt becomes really heavy. And we're still adding to the stock of debt. So again, the briefings that go on in the back rooms with finance ministers and prime ministers is to explain that long-term versus the medium term. So getting back to balance is really making sure the visa bill doesn't explode.
Yeah, see, when you walked me through the budget in a number of our meetings, and what struck me as interest costs, but also when you look at the growth in, now I support basic income programs like GIS and OAS, but with an aging population, there's fast growth in OAS and GIS in particular. Okay, so I want to get to, you're talking about flexibility, and at one moment you were talking about tax structures, and previously you talked about the situation in the United States. And so it's quite interesting because sometimes I'll talk to people who are worried about deficit spending, and then in the same conversation, those same people say, oh, but we have to stay competitive with the United States. But how does one stay competitive with the United States without blowing the budget, as it were? Yeah. Are there things that we could be doing today where we have the fiscal room to maneuver to make ourselves more competitive?
Yeah, and I think in a way we have a fiscal advantage over the United States right now. Their debt and their carrying costs of debt are higher than Canada. So there's this crowding out in their social expenditures that it's taking to a greater degree than us. So, but yeah, there was a big tax change brought in by President Trump. And it's being deficit financed. So basically, future generations are paying for lower personal income taxes and corporate income taxes. Wow. And it's massive. And it is stimulating the economy. We're growing about 2.5%. They're growing about 4%. So they're definitely, you can see the stimulus effect. And at some point in time, economists are already they'll kind of over the next year or so, that'll disappear. They're stuck with a deficit that is like probably 2 to 3 times bigger than Canada's deficit. So here today, and the Liberal Party is taking it on the chin, which is okay because it's politics and they have thick skin. But if we're running deficits of $15 to $20 billion in a Canadian context, so if we were running U.S.-style deficits, it would be like $70 billion. To be running a $70 billion and piling on this debt, like the stock of debt, when the economy is where it is, it's relatively strong, historically strong right now from the Canadian economy, that does not make sense.
It's the opposite of what pretty well every economist would tell you to do.
It's going to, you're basically, you're creating an intergenerational problem. You're passing on this debt. So future, political leaders are going to have to deal with it. I think definitely, I think President Trump and his Office of Management and Budget, they're aware of this, but as they're saying, somebody else is going to deal with it, not us. So for us, do we want to follow that? I mean, I think, having worked at the Department of Finance in the 80s and 90s, we ran these relatively large deficits every year. We got to the point in the early to mid 1990s where our credit rating was at stake, and we were paying so much on interest on relative to public debt that we had to deal with it. And actually, at that time, it was Prime Minister Craig Chan and Finance Minister Paul Martin said they just went at the problem. And they went at hard, and there's a lot of cuts. I think it was not an easy period of time in Canadian history, 1990s, Quebec referendum. We're cutting transfers on healthcare, on education, and public servants. And it was, but we got lucky because the economy was growing at a relatively fast rate, and interest rates were coming down. So this environment, you want to make sure that you don't blow your budget up like that. That's not responsible. So if somebody wants to chase lower tax rates by deficit financing it, do you really want to follow?
Yeah, race to the bottom, yeah. Okay, so I have 2 more questions, then I want to open up to people in the crowd. So one is about how we build the tax base, and the second is about value for money, sort of efficient spending, I guess. So the first one, the current Premier in Ontario doesn't like carbon taxes. There are conservatives across the country who don't like carbon tax. Some conservatives obviously do. So we've got the former Director of Policy, Mark Cameron, for Stephen Harper, who's been strongly supportive. You've got the recent Nobel Prize winner in economics, who received the prize for his work on carbon pricing, in support of carbon pricing. You've got Michael Chong, who obviously, if he'd been the leader of the Conservative Party, we would have a very different conversation right now, and I think a more positive conversation. But, so, obviously, I would assume, as an economist, you would be supportive of carbon pricing. That's not really where I want to go. I want to talk about consumption taxes, because carbon taxes are a form of consumption tax, and it seems to me when we have this competitiveness conversation, one way to address competitiveness that would be within the fiscal framework would be to shift away from income taxes, taxing what we want, and towards taxing consumption, whether increasing the GST, carbon taxes. There are a range of different consumption taxes. Do you think we politically, carbon taxes are one thing, but we're moving ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe we suffer politically, I'm not sure, I hope we don't. I don't think we will if we make the argument, but let's take GST. Do you think there is a conversation that should be had about increasing the GST and moving that towards income tax cuts, for example?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think history will judge the Liberals well for their, the climate change policy that was brought in under Minister McKenna, and the push to try to create a floor on these carbon prices and to move it up and to use carbon taxation. And I think it's also quite possible that, certainly as you noted in a number of provinces, that it's not going to sell well in the next election. You can lose seats. And I think that is, all kinds of statesmen, Churchill and others have talked about like the price that political leadership, there's a price to political leadership in this sort of context.
For doing the right thing.
Potentially for doing the right thing. And again, so then the question is, if you look to future generations, and we have some future generations in the back of the room, I'm just looking at it right now, I think it's like, carbon prices are the future. Carbon taxation is the future. It's definitely happening. So then the question
Or told to say price on pollution.
Or price on pollution.
That's the politician in me.
Yeah, no, but it's better.
Yeah, so I think, and you can use lots of examples now, different parts of the world, even in provinces in Canada where we've introduced carbon taxation, and Scandinavian countries have been there for decades. You can see what's been the impact on its potential growth rates. Has it really impacted in a negative way the trade? Has it been worth the price? So I think that is the future. I think, like, to me, you're absolutely right. So most economists, when they look at, taxation of income versus taxation of consumption, would think that you get a much more effective, efficient tax base if you tax more consumption. So, and I think it was a mistake for the previous government to take a significant bite out of the revenue base. On the goods and services tax, they basically lowered it from 7% to 5%. Every point is worth about $7 billion roughly. So, maybe took as much as $14, $15 billion out. And like I was with the premiers, maybe in the summertime, they were talking about farmer care, those sorts of things. I feel the same way. A few years from now, we're going to have a national farmer care program. And I don't know if it's going to be brought under this government or some future government, but if you look at the OECD countries, the ones that have universal healthcare systems, they all have national farmer care programs. They do just fine. We're going to get there anyways. We may be slow to get there, but it's going to happen. And I feel the same way on carbon taxes. Like, again, particularly go home, you watch the news, and we're talking about this historic damages in various areas. Off the Panhandle, like over the past week around Florida. But even in my area, we're seeing storms. I live in Ottawa. Like, we've had tornadoes. We've had incredible floods on the Ottawa River that we've not seen before. Like, I think people are waking up. We're getting reports from the United Nations saying, like, they're moving these deadlines closer, not further away. So I think even the naysayers, are going to come along sooner rather than later on carbon taxation.